Time now for an Ingram Angle investigation. Who are the people behind these caravans that many think are wreaking havoc at the southern border? There are certain groups, many inside our own country, who are the chief drivers of these efforts. At the tip of the spear is an advocacy group known as Pueblos Sin Fronteras. And we've highlighted them many times on the show. Pretty much before anyone was talking about them, we were. And they're described on their homepage as, quote, a collective of friends in permanent solidarity with displaced peoples. Sounds pretty nice. And the folks in charge of this group, Roberto Corona, he's a Mexican-born American and founder of Pueblos Sin Fronteras. Ireneo Mujica is a dual Mexican-American citizen who was actually arrested in Mexico earlier in the last month after he obstructed Mexican police efforts. And finally, there is American Alex Mensing. He's an American project coordinator with Pueblo in San Francisco. But it doesn't stop there. PSF is a sister group to the Chicago-based entity Centro Sin Fronteras. Fronteras is the word for borders in Spanish. And that's led by an activist, fairly left-wing, known as Emma Lozano. She doubles as the pastor at the Lincoln United Methodist Church in Chicago. Now, last night we told you how these church groups can often be used to blur the lines between religion and activism. Catholic Church, a lot of people know I'm a Catholic, they get almost $100 million a year to resettle refugees and migrants across the United States. Now, what we laid out is just a small part, though, tonight of the Fronteras web. And we will continue to expose in the days and weeks ahead those groups and individuals who are involved in this. And they help organize the caravans, starting in Honduras and Guatemala, and also American immigration lawyers at the same time are also involved. And joining us now, we're delighted they're with us. Their Vice President, Alan Orr, joins us, along with investigative reporter Hayden Ludig, who recently took a deep dive into the activists behind the caravan efforts. Gentlemen, thanks for being here tonight. Alan, let's start with you. Yes. The argument from some, and I'm one of them, is that this seems to go beyond kind of charitable efforts to help those in need to actually organizing people in foreign countries in large groups to eventually overwhelm our southern border. Is that accurate?
It sounds, so it really depends. So for American immigration lawyers, we are not in foreign countries. What we are doing are we are addressing individuals, either women, children, men who have been detained in the United States. So we're not doing the outreach abroad. Some of those people. There
are some lawyers, American lawyers, I know
but they're not part of our organization.
Okay,
it is not on behalf of our organization that they're doing that. And those people who call themselves Good Samaritans that are doing that sort of what they feel to be God's work, don't necessarily
A lot of them are doing the coaching, though. I mean, we've exposed this before. Lawyers from San Francisco, we try to get them on the show. They won't come on, who are literally down in these camps saying, right, well, this is how the process goes. You have to show a credible fear. This is what a credible fear. It's basically coaching people.
Well, I think some of it's coaching, some of it's being a lawyer, right? Because as a lawyer, we advise people what they need to do to meet the criteria.
You can't advise them to lie.
Well, not to lie, but we can tell them what the criteria is for them to be able to get into the country.
Most of the people, though, are economic migrants. 85, 90% of their claims are rejected. And they were under Obama, and they are under Trump. So these are overwhelmingly economic migrants who want to be here, be with family members, friends, or work here, and or all of those.
Right. So the issue is, if they really are economic migrants, then why not just process them, deny the cases, and send them back out, right? So that's really a U.S. border processing issue, not that of the migrant. So if the migrant walks in and says, I'm here to work, then we should be able to say, okay, no, that's not one of the reasons for the grounds to stay here. And so as lawyers, we're just saying, open up the ports and process the individuals. Don't send the military, send judges and social workers.
Let's talk about where this is from the Mexican standpoint here. Interesting polling that just came out today, at least I saw it today. 55% support tougher measures in future caravans. These are Mexicans. 52% support blocking them from entering the country without legal documentation. And that's El Universal, which is a very, very big Mexican newspaper. I actually read part of this in Spanish. I'm really trying to get my Spanish back. It's not quite there yet. But what about how this is playing in Mexico, on the Mexican side? Because it seems like every reporter down there is telling tales of woe in Tijuana.
Well, Mexico's paying the price, right? Ultimately, as Tucker Carlson's pointed out, it's mass piles of garbage that are being left over by this massive caravan of thousands of people moving up from Central America. They haven't crossed over into the United States yet, so it's Mexico that they're sitting in, and the Mexican people are paying the price for that, and they want these people to follow Mexican law. They've already shown a disdain for Mexican national sovereignty by violating their borders and going into Mexico.
Now, yeah, yesterday in the Angle, I pointed out Section 1324, 18 U.S.C., which is basically a very serious criminal provision that can be violated by anyone who is knowingly aiding and abetting those to come here to seek to game the system, violate our immigration laws. Be serious and serious repercussions if someone dies as a result of illegal efforts. There are laws on the books that exist that can be used to prosecute individuals who help conspire to violate immigration laws. Is there anything that you found in your investigative reporting that would indicate that there is rampant legal problems with what's being done on the so-called humanitarian side?
Well, I think in the United States, you have organizations, you pointed out two of them. There's a third one, La Familia Latina Unida, United Latin Family, right? That's right. And that organization, all three of them, they are pushing what a nonprofit can get away with. Emma Lozano, who runs Pueblo Centro and La Familia, for instance, has endorsed candidates for public office. J.B. Pritzker for Illinois governor just recently using United Methodist Church letterhead. So these organizations in the United States have shown a massive disdain for what nonprofits should be engaging in, both religious and secular nonprofits.
Yeah, Alan, a lot of these churches, Methodist Church, Lutheran Church, Catholic Church, they want pews. They have people in bodies in the pews.
Absolutely.
And her church, I believe they registered 1,600 DACA members to be in their church. 600, excuse me.
600. Helped them with their applications.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And so we're saying it's like, is it a church? Is it a kind of an activist group, community organizing? It's kind of a lot of things at once.
Absolutely.
And the question is, what are the motivations here? And are there legal ramifications when some of this so-called activism is really organizing people for wholesale, in wide-ranging violations of U.S. immigration law?
So I will not say that there are not people who don't violate the law. Immigrants who violate the code and individuals who do, but that is not rampant overall. But what I will tell you is that Mexico, while they are saying all these things about the immigrants, are absorbing them, right? They're giving them jobs.
Well, they're trying to give them asylum, and a lot of them aren't taking them. Gentlemen, we'll continue this. Thank you so much.
And Governor-elect Gavin Newsom was in San Diego today to discuss the migrant caravan crisis. Reporters were not allowed inside for his tour of the Otay Mesa Immigration Detention Center. He also visited a temporary shelter for immigrants seeking asylum. This week, Newsom condemned border officials' use of tear gas during Sunday's violence at the fence. He says that we're dealing with a refugee humanitarian issue that will have a lasting impact on the economy, too, if we don't find a resolution.
But I'll tell you this, San Diego, and folks in this region, they're going to end up out on the streets and sidewalks. People are going to be out on the streets and sidewalks. They're going to be in the emergency rooms. So we're going to have to address this issue. So you saw what happened here on Sunday. You all reported it. Estimated $5.3 million of economic loss just for a few hours of shutting down the border.
The governor-elect is headed to Mexico City this afternoon to lead a delegation of state officials and attend the inauguration of the Mexican president-elect.
June of this year, the people of Mexico voting in a new leader. Andrés Manuel López Obrador is the president-elect of Mexico. But as he takes office, there is a lot of uncertainty in Mexico and in our border region. Our Mike Jimenez explains. Mike?
Good evening, Brenda. On Saturday, the Mexican people will crown their new president. But just what does this president mean for the Mexican people, and how could his presidency affect the Rio Grande Valley? On Saturday, Mexican President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador of the Morena Party will be inaugurated as Mexican president. Obrador is a career politician, and during his campaign made many promises. Residents like Angelina Simón León say now is the time to see if Obrador can deliver.
Well, he has made a lot of promises about the issue of security, and now with the change of government, we are going to see if there is an answer to the promise he made.
Simón León says issues like security, the peace of the country, and the economy are the issues most important to the Mexican people.
Yes, the work sometimes it varies. Sometimes there is work and sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the job doesn't pay well. The minimum salary here is too low.
Economy experts like Duncan Wood says issues like the security in Mexico could play a big role in the economy of the Rio Grande Valley.
Issues like public security in northern Mexico, so that Mexicans are more willing to take the journey up from, say, Monterrey to cross over into McAllen to do their shopping. Those are issues which really matter, and they will have a very important economic impact on these communities.
Obrador has promised energy reform, stimulus to the agriculture sector, and decentralization of the executive cabinet. Yes, he is the president, but under the president is the cabinet, and they're the ones who govern. I can't say there will be change right away, at least not right now, no. And resident Simon Leon says only time will tell.
Well, in my personal opinion, I don't believe, but you have to give him his margin, right? You have to give him his space to see, but for me, it looks like nothing will change.
Now, several local dignitaries, including Congressman Vicente Gonzalez, say they plan on attending Saturday's inauguration. Reporting here at the Hidalgo International Bridge, I'm Mike Jimenez for KVO Local 23 News.
Mike, thank you. Manuel López Obrador, called AMLOS by the Mexican people, will be inaugurated in his hometown of Tepetitan in the state of Tabasco on Saturday. We're told the Brownsville mayor is one of only 3 mayors from Texas invited to that inauguration.
Republican Senator Mike Lee from Utah actually traveled to Guatemala and Mexico a short time ago, looking for solutions to the immigration crisis. He's got some ideas. He's here to discuss it. Welcome, Senator. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
All right, what did you see when you traveled down there? What kind of reaction did you get in trying to work with the leaders in Mexico to find a solution?
What I saw is that the leaders in Mexico care very much about this issue. They want to make sure that Mexico isn't just a thoroughfare for people passing through these northern triangle states, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, trying to get to the United States. They want to solve the problem just as badly as we do.
And I know there's been this talk of having a safe third country, and Mexico along the way has offered some things to the migrants as they've passed through. My understanding there's a very small number who have taken them up on that. So how would that process work if the people who are passing through don't actually want to take advantage of Mexico as another option?
Well, if they don't want to take advantage of that, that is their loss, unless we have in place either a safe third country agreement that says if you want to apply for asylum, given that Mexico is a safe country relative to Honduras or El Salvador, for example, then you wouldn't be able to apply for asylum in the United States if you had first crossed through Mexico to get here. But the other option, and one that I discussed with Olga Sanchez Cordero, the incoming Interior Minister in Mexico, is the idea of requiring people to stay in Mexico and remain in Mexico while their U.S. asylum applications are pending. That's something that really has potential, and that's something I think that could end up coming to fruition.
Well, some of what's going on there, especially in the Tijuana area, we have this from the health department now, as thousands are on that side of the border waiting and hoping to come across. They've treated more than 2,000 migrants for health-related issues, more than 60% suffering from respiratory infections, 3 confirmed cases of TB, 4 confirmed cases of HIV/AIDS, more than 100 confirmed cases of lice, 4 confirmed cases of chickenpox. I mean, some of these things are things that can spread, skin infections as well, when huddled people are together in close quarters without a lot of medical treatment.
Yeah, that's right. It's one of the many reasons why this is a problem. And if you take a step back from the contentiousness of the immigration issue, and you think about this the way we approach other aspects of our lives. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to church, when you go to a sporting event or a concert, there are rules. There are gates that you have to enter, either doorways or fences or something. And you have to respect those rules. And if at any time there's a big mob that overwhelms that gate or that door or the entrance or the exit, there are problems, and you lose your privileges. If everyone behaved like a mob with those places wouldn't exist anymore. We wouldn't have access to them. And so what we're really afraid of in this country is mob rule and the behavior of a mob. What we have on the border is a mob taking advantage of that. That isn't right.
Here is one migrant from El Salvador, Jose Velez, about his plan.
If we can't cross now, we'll work here in Mexico and pay for a smuggler to take us. There's no need to tell lies. The important thing is to make the effort.
How do you combat that?
Well, it's an interesting point. If they think that there's no consequence to immigrating illegally, then they're going to do it. And that's one of the reasons why I applaud the Trump administration's dedication to this issue. The fact that they're going down there trying to shore up the border, trying to ensure border security. That is a very good idea for all sorts of reasons, including the health risks that you mentioned and including the fact that we don't react well to mob rule in this country. And it's not just about the immigrants themselves. It's also and especially about the people who live right along the border. Having lived in border communities for 2 years of my life, I can tell you no one worries more about the security of their families, the security of their jobs and their neighborhoods, more than recent immigrants who live along border towns.
So why isn't Congress getting something done? I mean, we've had a situation where Democrats controlled White House, House, and Senate. We've had Republicans controlling those same three very important players, but yet nothing has been resolved.
Well, I think the biggest problem in this area relative to Congress is that Congress has been taking the approach that it has to be all or nothing. Remember 5 years ago when we had the big effort, the Gang of Eight bill that moved forward. The problem with that is they amalgamated 100 different ideas, lumped them all together, and then said, here you go. You have to take all of this package or you get none of it. Every reform that we, the Gang of Eight, have proposed, or nothing gets passed at all. I think that's the wrong way to do it. I think if we took it one bite at a time, we'd get more finished.
Will Democrats do that with you?
I hope so. I've been trying for 8 years to get them to do that. In some instances, I've found Democrats willing to cooperate on narrow immigration fixes. I hope that can gradually build momentum.
All right, we will see. It's going to be a different game in January when the new Congress is sworn in. It will include you. Senator, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so Congress, of course, doesn't want to give Trump a dime for a border wall. But the president is still not backing down, saying he's totally willing to shut down the federal government if Congress doesn't secure the funds. And I say, Mr. President, do it. It is absolutely worth it. This is the fight of our generation. If we lose the fight on the border, we lose the country. And so if that means you have to see some non-essential government employees at the park or at a museum go home and wait a couple days for their paycheck, because that is all that happens during a government shutdown, it is a risk I'm willing to take to save the country from being ravaged by these belligerent illegal criminals.
We will begin working on an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall.
But unfortunately, the useless wags in Congress have put their petty anti-Trump agenda over the security of our nation. And that's exactly what it is, because don't forget, the Democrats, they used to believe in border security.
We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked, and circumventing the line of people who are waiting patiently, diligently, and lawfully to become immigrants in this country.
Man, I hate that guy. But now, of course, it's radical, it's racist, it's hateful. So how much is stupid Congress giving us to build the wall?
The $1.6 billion for border security negotiated by Democrats and Republicans is our position.
$1.6 billion? That's like a couple of bucks for the feds. What are we going to do with that? Put up a no trespassing sign? They're already tearing down the existing fence, so now we need the funding on this wall more than ever. Marco Rubio actually put it well when he said this.
Having a partial wall is not enough. This is a project that's designed to flow traffic. What you want to do is you want to cut off areas where people can cross so that they can only cross in certain places, and then you can monitor those places. So if the wall is not built all 800 miles, if you don't have the entire system in place, none of it works. It's not one of those things where you can have half of it. Half of it is as good as none of it.
So with $1.6 billion, we might as well not have anything. Now, hear me out. I think in the ideal scenario, we'd have like a Game of Thrones style wall. You know, this thing worked for what, 8,000 years, 700 feet tall, 300 feet wide. And I think unless the illegal immigrants have fire-breathing dragons that they can strap those diaper-clad kids onto, they have no chance of getting in except by going to a legal point of entry. However, I'd settle for something like the Great Wall of China. I mean, they could build this thing in the 1300s. We can absolutely do it today. And what you do is you put little turrets, I don't know, every half mile or so with machine guns, so when the migrants see them, they know what they're up against. And it's an added benefit that there's that space that you see on top. So you can walk on top of it, because you know you got all these people out there saying, these poor immigrants, they don't know how to find a port of entry. They have no choice. Well, now Trump supporters can stand on top and they can say, hey, you with the boulder in your hand, put down the rock. The port of entry is that way. Go there and come back legally. But at the very least, we need like a double layer barrier with a security zone in the middle, similar to what they have in San Diego, where apprehensions have declined 96% since 2005. That's not something you're hearing the mainstream media shout from the rooftops. So make sure everyone you know is aware of these staggering numbers. And if you're on Facebook, by the way, hit the share button below so people know. In the fiscal year of 2014, apprehensions fell from 138,438 to 5,902. And guess what? You're not going to get those kinds of walls with the measly $1.6 billion, Schumer. If they're not going to give Republicans at least $5 billion, we may as well not have anything. Now, as you remember, the president already signed a bill in March that prohibited him from building any part of the wall. And he made a promise to the American people to never, ever, ever sign another bill like this again. So he cannot sign another bill that will give him peanuts for the wall. And if that means government gets shut down, so be it. Schumer's out there saying it's on the Republicans' back. All right, so be it. The American people will applaud them for it. If a few workers at national parks and at museums and at monuments have to go home, that's the price we pay for a ridiculous opposition party who has no regard for the safety of the people they were elected to represent. The major functions of government and the military still operate with a government shutdown. But if Congress does not get it done, as Commander-in-Chief, President Trump has the power to direct the Department of Defense on how to defend our nation. And he's before actually floated the idea of using the military to build the wall. He said this on Twitter, quote, "Because of the $700 and $716 billion gotten to rebuild our military, many jobs are created and our military is again rich. Building a great border wall with drugs, poison, and enemy combatants pouring into our country is all about national defense. Build the wall with the military." Yes, if Congress wants to engage in these petty fights, then so be it. There are ways to go around them, and it's the right move when our sovereignty is under attack. And the next president isn't going to be able to come in and tear down the wall like he could with an executive order. I mean, our military engages in defense all over the world, and those are all done without a declaration from Congress. But for some reason, we're not able to do it right here on our own border. Illegal immigration is an attack on our national defense. We have seen countless deaths at the hands of illegal immigrants, and that does not include the chemical warfare. More people are dying every year from heroin and fentanyl overdoses than any war that we've got going on overseas. And where do you think those and other harmful drugs are coming in from? Well, they're coming in from the Mexican drug cartels, who are the primary source of heroin in the United States. And all of this comes because we do not have a wall on our border. This is an issue of national defense, and we, the American people and the president, need to fight like hell for it.
They're just shooting more tear gas.
Newsom says women and children looking for asylum have been met with violence and fear at the border.
We need to humanize this issue, not politicize the issue. Address what legitimately can be described as a humanitarian crisis.
But President Trump sees things differently than the incoming governor.
When people look at what's going on the border, they just agree pretty much, not pretty much, they agree with what we're doing.
The collaboration and cooperation we're getting from the federal government, and we're very grateful for that. There's no politics being played here.
Newsom was with Trump in California recently, visiting areas devastated by wildfires. That's where Newsom says he had a chance to bring up the border with the Trump administration.
We've had the chance indirectly to converse not only about my comment, that public comment, but about my desire to be a working partner, not a sparring partner.
Newsom says he hopes the president will visit the border himself to better understand the impacts of how closing a port of entry affects both countries.
And every time, with respect, that there is a flippant comment about shutting down the border, it impacts the economy and the lives of hundreds of thousands, not millions of people that are reliant on that trade and commerce on a daily basis.
President Trump, though, has downplayed the effects of a border closure.
Mexico, frankly, on trade does much better than we do with them. So when we close the border, it's much more painful for Mexico than it is for us by a factor of maybe about 10 or more.
The San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce says the most recent border shutdown lasted around 5 hours and cost U.S. businesses an estimated $5.3 million.
You can't talk about economic growth, economic prosperity, unless you're talking about that cross-border trade. Mexico's profoundly, not significantly, profoundly important to the economic vibrancy of not just California, but this country.
Newsom is planning on attending the new president of Mexico's inauguration this weekend. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
We're watching, but the world is watching, and this is what scares me, because there are soon-to-be, possibly would-be illegal immigrants south of the border, and they're watching what's happening at the border in this so-called caravan. And if these people are allowed into our republic, it sets a horrible precedent, and it gives them a green light to come up. But you heard Scalise talk about terrorists. I think terrorists are watching this too. And they saw what happened on Sunday, and that huge mass of people, and we moved a lot of our people, our personnel, to the border to stop them. Well, that's a perfect diversion, is it not, for their nefarious activity at some other point down along the border where it's become the weekend. In other words, there are huge national security implications here.
No question about it, Graham. Listen, the Border Patrol has had to deploy resources that are in Texas and Arizona, move them all to San Diego area to try to deter the caravan. And naturally, the drug traffickers and smugglers all know the weak points. Look, the smugglers, the caravan crowd, they all know U.S. policy better than most American citizens, I guarantee you. And, you know, we all saw what happened in Europe in 2015. If you establish a policy that says that unlimited hundreds of millions of people can come, crash your borders, demand asylum, get elaborate hearings, get a work document, public benefits for years before they ever get a hearing, and then expect taxpayers to spend all this money go finding them after the fact while Democrats push for big amnesty, you know then what's going to happen. You're going to get millions more.
Yep.
And so our asylum policy is not supposed to be a death sentence for the nation. It's not supposed to create total chaos and out-of-control immigration. Congress has got time in the lame duck. Call them back in. You know, Ryan needs to step aside for a while. Let's let someone else run things for a bit. Bring up an asylum reform package that says, look, if you go through any safe country, you can't make an asylum claim in the U.S. You can't run through 5 or 6 countries and decide where you want to live. That's not the way international humanitarian law works if you're a bona fide refugee. This is plain, simple alien smuggling, organized trafficking, nothing more, nothing less.
And there's plenty of time for these Republican leadership in this lame duck session to accomplish something like this. They're talking about E-Verify, hope and pray that happens, but how about plugging these loopholes and ending the special status that allows these people to think that they can just, we are a civil society, and these people are coming up from the third world. And by the way, Dan, they're moving from the San Isidro area, which is South San Diego, essentially just north of Tijuana. They're moving from the TJ area. They're moving east toward Yuma, and they're going to try and cross there, and they'll probably end up at El Paso because of this very same reason that I talked about just a few seconds ago. They're simply trying to exploit these loopholes in our law. They want us to conform to them, and the message has to be sent, no, we are a civil society. You can't do that.
Well, Senator Feinstein originally drafted the bill that said if you show up with minor kids, you're going to get special treatment. That's the Wilberforce Anti-Trafficking Act, a law that now is exploited by traffickers. The better part of political leadership would be to come forward and say, you know, it was a well-intended law, but obviously having unintended consequences. Need to change the law. But for whatever reason, the Democrats have this view, we don't have to do anything. We can play politics with this issue. You know, we're not going to give Trump any victory. We don't want to see Trump sign a DACA amnesty bill in the Rose Garden, so we're not going to give him anything, even though he made magnanimous offers in the State of the Union last year to, you know, to give them this year actually, to give them a big amnesty in exchange for what he wanted. Trump's got some very specific things, right? Build a wall, get rid of diversity lottery, cut chain migration, E-Verify. It's all it's very popular. The American people want it. How come Congress can't deliver?
We're either a nation of laws or we are not. And to be perfectly frank, these people don't look like refugees to me. Not the refugee pictures I've seen before. They're walking with cell phones. That doesn't look like exactly how I would define personally a refugee. They should go home, get in line with everybody else, and wait lawfully the way we want them to do it by our laws instead of trying to exploit the weaknesses they know exist in the existing law. And it's very important that this president pushes back, not only in court to these lawyers dressed in black robes that are trying to stop him from enforcing existing immigration law, but it's also very important that we deploy tear gas and pepper spray, just like Barack Obama did in 2012 and 2014. And it's very important that we push back and the president shows this force to say, hey, you got to play by our rules. It sends a message to everyone in the world who's watching this situation unfold right now. Dan, thanks.
Rio Grande Valley may have dodged a major financial bullet when the caravan decided not to come to Texas. The one-day closure of the border in San Isidro during Black Friday cost businesses more than $5 million. President Trump has threatened to shut down the California border region permanently because of the restless caravan. That could cost businesses along the border hundreds of millions of dollars in the long run.
Breaking news off the top tonight. The Associated Press reporting the man who's been in sanctuary in a Durham church for the past year has been deported. Samuel Oliver Bruno came into the country illegally in 2014. Supporters say it was to care for his sick wife. Last week, he left the church where he'd been staying for the past year for a fingerprinting appointment in Morrisville. He was then transferred to a facility in Georgia. CBS 17's Zach Dahlheimer has been on this story since it broke last week. Zach.
Yeah, Angela, just hours before he was deported, dozens joined Oliver Bruno's family, rallying in his support.
Standing up for justice, we shall not be moved.
Oliver Bruno's family believed he had been moved from a jail in Georgia. ICE officials moved him there last week after he left the Citywell Church for his appointment. Last week, several people surrounded a gold van outside the office where Oliver Bruno sat as agents prepared to drive him away. Morrisville police detained more than 24 people at the scene. Now, earlier tonight, I talked with Sean Fields. He's an assistant professor of law at Campbell University who specializes in immigration law. He, just like politicians on both sides, believes immigration laws are broken, adding the debate is over how they're broken.
Some would say that Mr. Oliver Bruno's ability to even remain in the country demonstrates that the immigration laws are broken because he committed a violation in 2014 and is still here 4 years later. Others, I think, in the reform community looking at this case, would see we need to reform our laws to make it easier for individuals like Mr. Oliver Bruno to regularize their status, to be here with lawful residents like immediate family members, like a sick wife.
Fields also added he believes in the short term a lot of immigration reform advocates are going to be more on guard. Meanwhile, in the long term, he says he hopes more comprehensive reform to immigration laws will come, whether that means stepped up enforcement measures or more humanitarian measures. Angela?
A Fredericksburg lawmaker is now trying to get support for a bill that would make undocumented students pay more than triple what they pay now to attend a public university in Texas. Republican Rep. Kyle Birdman wants to repeal the Texas DREAM Act. Danielle Rojas, a senior at UT Austin and youth organizer, is protected from deportation through DACA, and she's been living here for years. That law is now in jeopardy.
Already applying to college as an undocumented student is very terrifying. It was devastating at the same time because you have these hopes of going to college and then there comes this obstacle that you have no control over.
There are about 25,000 students covered by the DREAM Act. If you may recall, the Texas DREAM Act became a law in 2001 and allows people to pay in-state tuition if they've lived in Texas for 3 years.
Well, Minneapolis may become the next U.S. city to issue its own ID cards. They would be available to all residents, but as John Croman reports, they'd be especially useful to undocumented immigrants who can't qualify for state IDs.
East Lake Street, the heart of the Minneapolis Latino community, an area where the idea of a city-issued ID is very popular.
If I bring my dollars to an American store, to a mall, to everywhere, everyone benefits from it. So having an ID creates a ripple effect.
Many large cities have already issued municipal IDs to be used in banking and commerce, especially for those who have trouble getting state-issued IDs.
Anyone that's a Minneapolis resident will be able to qualify for a municipal ID. They will have to show other forms of identification to be able to get it.
9th Ward Council member Alondra Cano says it's not a gateway to voting or driving.
Yeah, we don't want folks to think that this is a driver's license. That actually is going to be part of the state's effort this year.
Mexican immigrant Jovita Morales has worked behind the scenes for the city ID and would benefit from it herself.
Report a crime and police come and you will show up your ID and automatically, okay, we recognize this ID and you know where you live.
Morales says she's one of many undocumented immigrants who hesitated to call police, assuming they'd ask for state IDs.
A long time ago, I've been experiencing domestic violence and I couldn't call the police because I was afraid.
We want everybody to have the ability to open a bank account. To make sure that, when you get paid on a Friday, you're able to head over, place some money in the checking account, and not carrying around huge wads of cash in your pocket.
And Mayor Fry says the city staff's exploring ways to make the city ID card also double as a transit pass. Minneapolis would not be the first city in Minnesota to issue municipal IDs. That distinction goes to the town of Northfield, which started issuing them back in March. For KARE 11 News, I'm John Croman.
You're not going to believe how NBC is spinning the violent caravan into heroes. Yes, it's mind-blowing. Jack Davis for the Western Journal reports that the migrant caravan bringing disruption and violence to the southern border is now being portrayed in some corners of the media as an LGBTQ love story. Yes, NBC recently highlighted a group of migrants involved in a mass wedding in a story headlined, "Dream Come True, Migrant Caravan LGBTQ couples celebrate a mass wedding." Quote, "This is really a dream come true because you don't see this in our home countries, and this is something we've always wanted to do, and today we had the opportunity to do so. I'm very happy," said a Guatemalan Pedro Nemias pastor who married Honduran Eric Alexander Duran. Quote, "This is an act of justice," maintained Hugo Cordoba, a Unitarian Universalist officiant who married some of the couples. Quote, "The dream of marrying is an illusion for most of them. We are helping making this a reality." Although NBC didn't report, the Associated Press noted that during the march north, the violence within the caravan often emerged with LGBTQ marchers as a target. And to cope with the violence, about 80 openly LGBTQ migrants split off from the caravan and reached Tijuana ahead of the rest. They state here that they insisted that the LGBTQ splinter group would seek asylum in conformity with U.S. laws, citing persecution against them as a reason to be granted asylum. Central American LGBTQ migrants escaped violence and discrimination and married in Mexico, where gay marriage is legal. So, I mean, why do they have to be heroes in our country? I mean, can't these invaders go be heroes in their own country? If they were heroes, they would see what's wrong in their country and make it right there. But they're escaping. There's no heroism in running away. They should be resolving the problems in their own country. That would be heroic. In my opinion, these guys are just cowards. Comment below. We'll see you at the next report. For the Next News Network, I'm Gary Franchi.
The Mexican government is starting to deport hundreds of migrants from that Central American caravan now in Tijuana. The city can't afford to feed, clothe, and give medical attention to the group for much longer. So the Mexican government is asking for volunteers to go back home. The next phase may involve mandatory deportation, with thousands of migrants expected to endure a long wait in Tijuana. Frustration is spilling over. Most Mexicans don't want them there, and they can't cross into the U.S. legally. Right now, there are more than 7,000 migrants at the U.S. border in Tijuana. And despite President Trump's threats, 10 Democratic members today joining Valley Congressmen Vicente Gonzalez and Henry Cuellar in a letter writing to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, opposing the border wall. This following recent comments made by Schumer stating that Democrats will only agree to $1.6 billion in the next budget towards the border wall. Rep. Cuellar saying, quote, "I strongly encourage Leader Schumer to reconsider and clarify that Democrats should accept no funding for a wall." Also thanking his colleagues for spearheading this important issue and making it clear that they will not negotiate when it comes to a border wall. President Trump wants $5 billion to build the wall, or is threatening to veto any new legislation.
U.S. President Donald Trump calls on Mexico to send the caravan of migrants seeking asylum in the United States back to their home countries. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidoo, and this is The Heat. 2 weeks now, thousands of Central American migrants have been arriving at the Mexican border city of Tijuana in hopes of reaching the United States. The migrants from Honduras, Guatemala and El Salvador say they're fleeing the threat of violence at home and seeking a better life. On Sunday, a peaceful protest turned violent when U.S. border agents used tear gas and rubber bullets to stop a group, including women and children, from illegally crossing the border. We begin our coverage right now with CGTN's Alistair Baverstock, who is in Tijuana. And Alistair, U.S. President Donald Trump is defending the use of tear gas against those migrants. But what have you been hearing from Mexican officials?
Well, while Donald Trump may have described yesterday, following his Thanksgiving break, that these tear gas canisters which were used on women and children as this migrant caravan made its way towards the border as very safe, Mexico certainly doesn't agree. Some 500 migrants were chased back into Mexico. Not one stepped foot on U.S. soil, yet Mexico is nevertheless asking for an internal investigation to be conducted within the United States for exactly why not only first were these tear gas canisters used, as I mentioned, on women and children as well as the men in this caravan, but secondly, why these tear gas canisters were fired across an international border. Tear gas canisters fired into Mexican territory is becoming a rather serious political incident here, and as the US seeks Mexico's help in this ongoing migrant caravan situation, this won't do the two countries' international diplomatic relationship a great deal of good. However, news is just breaking today that Mexico and the US's top diplomats will be meeting in the White House next week to discuss the ongoing plan that Donald Trump has suggested for migrants to remain in Mexico while their asylum claims are processed.
Now, Alistair, U.S. authorities closed the San Isidro border crossing briefly on Sunday, and President Trump has threatened to shut it down again. How would that impact trade and, of course, travelers?
Well, the closure of this border, which we are just steps from at the moment, it will have a very large impact on Tijuana. The San Isidro border is the world's busiest international land frontier, with more than 200,000 vehicles and people moving across it every day. The fact that a great deal of Tijuana residents here cross that border on a daily basis to go to work, and the fact that it is being open and closed depending on this migrant caravan's decisions and actions is going to have a very great impact, not only on the economy in Tijuana, the local trade, international relations, but also the way in which this caravan's ongoing relationship is with the local population here in Tijuana.
Now, the migrants who are arriving in Tijuana, what are conditions like for them? What kind of help are they getting?
Well, where the migrants are housed is exactly here. This is the stadium where some 5,700 migrants are currently housed. And while conditions may have been decent enough when they first arrived, they are now getting tougher and tougher. Tijuana's local authorities have almost entirely ceased to give them any aid, and food, water is now almost entirely relied upon by charitable organizations. Just half an hour ago, we were standing here when the charitable organization arrived with a box of donuts. There was an absolute scramble for people to get their hands on this very scarce food, and it's something which isn't doing a great deal of good for the relationship between these migrants as they wait here at the US border. The mayor of Tijuana has already described this caravan as a humanitarian crisis, and that is something which has led him to plead to the UN, the United Nations, for humanitarian aid, economic aid, to help these migrants not only to stay alive, but to stay safe, fed and watered. We are just hearing also that there are 34 pregnant women inside this stadium, and goodness only knows what happens when they eventually come to give birth, some of them very close, but the wait here remains indeterminate. They don't know when exactly they will be allowed into the United States.
The donations from our community, 2 freelance photojournalists from Colombia went to see the migrant caravan with their own eyes. Sean Rayford and Thomas Hammond met the refugees and wanted to share their stories. Both were in Tijuana during the clash this Sunday. Thomas sat down with us to tell us about his experience, as did Sean, who FaceTimed us from Tijuana.
My life work is to go explore those things that make us curious.
The major story is the experience of these people right now just kind of sitting in this camp, kind of in a weird limbo.
Sean Rayford and Thomas Hammond arrived in Tijuana, Mexico Monday, November 19th, to work on a photo project covering the refugee caravan. These are their photos.
It went from just kind of a more subdued piece about the last mile of the journey to this huge, moment of international breaking news.
Sunday, both planned to cover a march. The migrants started demonstrations at midday. As the group tried to cross the bridge to the port of entry, Mexican police blocked the way.
The caravan couldn't get onto the bridge in which they were trying to march across. And the crowd kept backing up, and tensions kept rising because their goal was to march across that bridge.
Nobody we talked to wanted to cross illegally. They all wanted to do it legally, but a lot of them didn't really understand what that process was.
Eventually, they say the group decided they'd get around police another way.
They made their way to the Tijuana River, which is very reminiscent of, the Los Angeles River, which is a big concrete slab. And the water that's running through it is pretty disgusting, and parts of it are literally covered in sewage that people had to walk through, and it smelled horrible.
It was on the border of the concrete slab, what's being described as a concrete arena, where migrants came face to face with Border Patrol.
For a period of about 3 hours, there was nobody that seemed to be really in control of anything. It was kind of like, 10 football games happening at the same time.
Then, Sean says Border Patrol began deploying tear gas.
I found myself running side by side away from the tear gas with the Mexican federales, and it was kind of this surreal moment where I was like, man, my people are throwing tear gas at not only me, but also, the Mexican federal police.
You just start kind of choking a little bit, and then your eyes start burning, and then you can kind of start to feel your skin burning because it just kind of coats everything.
At some point, I know people were throwing rocks at the Border Patrol. I don't know who threw the projectiles first or started it. So that's probably a question that's honestly never going to be answered, is to kind of, who threw the first, stone, so to speak.
They say the caravan is comprised of Hondurans mostly, with people from El Salvador and Guatemala mixed in.
Most of the people that I ended up talking to traveled alone. Some of them had family back home. Some of them were teenagers who, left home because, of extreme poverty and violence.
The campsite along the border where migrants sleep sits in the middle of a sports and health center.
I felt extremely safe around the caravan. People were kind, there's families everywhere. I get the sense that everyone's looking out for each other, and that they understand that if someone in their group does something bad, that it's going to reflect poorly on them.
Sean and Thomas spent Thanksgiving with the caravan and witnessed stranger after stranger who crossed the border from the U.S. donate necessities to the families.
Another guy comes walking up with, a case of water on his shoulder, and he was like, "Where are the women and children?" And I was like, "They're everywhere." I think we would all have more compassion for people if we, got outside of our little bubbles. I feel the need to encourage people, don't necessarily let your fears prevent you from going to see the world.
Now that just covers a fraction of Thomas and Sean's experience with the caravan in Tijuana. You will have an opportunity to see more of their photos, hear more stories, and ask any questions you may have at a panel discussion set for Wednesday, December 12th at 7 p.m. at the TAPS Art Center.